It is Tuesday, February 18th, and they are important connections to our local communities. Things like CCX Media, the old Cable 12 in the northwest suburbs, Mesabi Community TV. They're funded by a fee that local cable companies pay, and they're now in jeopardy. Star Tribune front page talking about an FCC interpretation of an old rule. It's a new interpretation. Basically, cable companies are allowed to run those cable lines underground in exchange for paying what's called a franchise fee to local governments. Well, that franchise fee, part of it, goes to local public access channels. But now the FCC is saying cable companies can count in-kind contributions towards that fee. So if they gave like free cable connection to a school or a service discount to seniors, that could dry up the funding for local access television. Big issue. Wisconsin County is the focus of a New York Times article about crumbling rural roads. If you've driven from here to Madison or Chicago, you've gone past Osseo, Wisconsin, Trempealeau County. It's near Winona, no different from most small agricultural counties all around the country. Here's what the New York Times says. Throughout much of the Midwest and the South, the rural transportation system is crumbling. 2/3 of the nation's freight comes from rural areas, and tractor trailers and farm equipment just keeps getting bigger and bigger, longer, heavier. 19% of the country lives in rural areas, but those regions have 68% of the total lane and road miles. Normally, an asphalt road would last 30 years. In Trempealeau County, their roads now average 74 years. Where to get the money? The question. A 5-year dispute between a St. Paul restaurant owner and the city is over, and the city won. Here's the story from the Pioneer Press about the Commodore. When it opened, it had a permit to have a bar and a restaurant. But the city says it did not have a permit to use another room in the building as part of the restaurant. Owner John Rupp disagreed, but opened that extra room anyway as a restaurant. A state judge assessed a $500 fine. No big deal, right? But he had to pay $24,000 in hearing costs for all the hearings they've had over this thing over the last 5 years. Maybe you should have just paid the fine in the first place, right? Love this trend. Solo travel on the rise. 60% of people who travel plan on doing it alone in the next 2 years. USA Today reports that no, you are not alone as a solo traveler. People love it and hate it, though. Loneliness a concern for half. Almost half worry about safety, but more cruise companies and tour operators are offering solo trips. Women do this more than men. And these stories always get me. In the Star Tribune, John Ryan writing about the smiley face water tower in Freeport. This thing is on I-94 in Stearns County. It's been up for 100 years. No one's sure what local resident climbed up there in the early 1970s and painted that smiley face on it, but people loved it. It became part of the city's official seal. But that tower no longer holds water. There's a new tower in town. The stability of this thing is questionable. It's rusty. So do you spend what could be $50,000 to $150,000 to repair something that is essentially just a sign, or do you tear it down? The smiley face. How much is a smiley face worth?
It's a good question.
But it's part of the town, though.
It's part of the fabric of the town.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
can you imagine like passing through and not seeing it? I mean, it'd be kind of sad.
Yeah.
Exactly. The frown would be turned upside down.
Yeah, we don't want that. We want people to be happy.
Yeah.
All right, Jason, thank you.